Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 20th of May, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I am your host, Brian Gerrish. I'm delighted to be joined by Alex Thomson and Mark Anderson. Well, just as we were settling into the studio today, some really quite extraordinary news came through, and that is that the International Criminal Court has apparently issued arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and the leader of Hamas. I don't have any further information on that, but we're going to bring Alex Thomson in straight away because, Alex, you've got a little bit of a premonition that something was afoot.
All the linguists, Brian, who are following the advertisements on the International Criminal Court's website from The Hague knew something was afoot. Let's bring that up on screen now. A couple of days ago, this was doing the rounds among professional interpreters and translators and transcribers, and I've done all three professions. All of these three branches of Hebrew to English assistants were required to apply to that, with that reference number to The Hague, which could only mean that they were about to go for Bibi. It doesn't always end up that way. When the prosecutor was Fatou Bensouda from the Gambia, I was one of those who have Georgian who applied because I knew that they were interested in indicting Mikhail Saakashvili after the South Ossetia war, similarly, but that never went anywhere. But there you are. It has happened, and we will see where it leads.
Yeah, extraordinary times.
It absolutely is. And we may as well go straight on to Georgian news because we have a lot to say about that now. Here's just one example of press cartoons giving an impression of what is going to happen now that the Georgian Dream Party, which has its majority in parliament, has managed to pass the foreign agents registration bill. So it has now become an act. President Salome Zurabishvili, who is originally from France, although Georgian by ethnicity, is against it but cannot veto indefinitely. So here we see top Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze maliciously diverting the bus of Georgians who apparently with one voice wanted to go to the European Union and sending them to the Kremlin instead. Is this all that can be said about it? Well, no, it's rather more complex than that. Here we see one take from Nick Griffin, formerly the most important British nationalist politician, now quite a following on Telegram, but a divisive figure even within the nationalist scene. But his particular take on this is that every day brings a new blow to the Washington/Wall Street empire. And he points out that Georgia is not the only country wishing to regulate and scrutinize foreign paid persons and organizations by law, because Turkey is doing the same, he says. And he says it's all about reducing the influence of so-called Western, because he thinks they're not really Western, but a financial cabal, liberal non-governmental organizations. If you want the detail on this, and let's just translate this because most of our viewers don't even know what script that is, that's Georgian script. There is a site which will be in the show notes, whose name translates as Illuminate, Gaanate in Georgia, and they have put the very basic bare bones in here. And I think the point here is that this explainer, which is for the non-specialist Georgians who are ranging from clueless to outraged, it's telling them really the bare bones of this law, and what it is devoid of is the scare reporting, which has been featured in other channels. There is no mention in this bare bones analysis, which is being passed around, shall we say, the mainstream pro-Western youth in Georgian society. There's no indication here of people having to be obliged to disclose their sexuality, or individuals being gone after by this law rather than organizations. And that, I think, is significant. So you can read that. You will, when you load it from the show notes, give it a couple of seconds, depending on your device type and browser, for the translation to load into English. Otherwise, you will be disappointed and think that it's just Georgian. But it's not as controversial and outrageous as people think. I hesitate even to mention Reddit as an internet source, but occasionally there are gems there. And in the Reddit subthread, a subreddit called Sakartvelo, the Georgian name for Georgia, earlier this week, somebody, it's the usual caveat, it's an anonymous person calling themselves potential scholar, so a young academic, is giving an explainer on the law on transparency of foreign influence. I cannot vouch for who this is, but they have had the time to go through the contrasts and comparisons between this and the best known existing foreign agents Registration Act, which is the United States original of the genre from 1938, and they've contrasted the two in the following few slides, which I'll not read out in full, but because people can freeze the screen and read the whole lot. But look, this is obviously somebody who is negatively inclined towards the new law, and who would go along with the Western media talking points and the Georgian media talking points and opposition talking points that this is a way of chilling and freezing dissent in Georgia, having a chilling effect. The first of the 5 slides of contrasts says that while the Georgian law broadly targets the NGOs and scattergun approach, FARA applies, because it was enacted on the eve of the Second World War, to agents of foreign principles, and it excludes NGOs, which weren't really such a big deal back in the era of Roosevelt, unless they're acting as agents of a foreign government. Okay, be that as it may, that's the first claim. The second contrast is that while the Georgian law will stifle civil society, it's always such a buzzword in emerging democracies like this, civil society, FARA provides transparency. So to my mind, just giving my own opinion, this is a verging towards just being an apologist for America good, anyone else who tries the same thing bad, because it's taking America's word for it. And people who watched last week will know that Canada is in the process of doing similarly. So has Britain and several continental European countries, but there are differences between all these: Turkey's law, Russia's law, and Georgia's law. But everyone in the geopolitical space really is enacting such a thing now. The third of the 5 contrasts offered by Mr. or Miss Potential Scholar on Reddit is that the Georgian version is equipped with teeth, fines if you don't comply. You can even be criminally prosecuted for failure to tell the Georgian government what they want to know about your organization if it's more than 20% foreign funded. In the US, the Foreign Agents Registration Act can, if infringed, result in the same penalties. But the law is, it says, primarily focused on transparency. This is fluffy language, right? This is not reassuring to me that America's law really is better. This is just, what America does is better because I say so. I don't see any primary sources in here. Fourthly, FARA targets individuals and organizations who are politically active, but Georgia, and we heard this talking point 2 weeks ago from the BBC, as if you watched that episode, you will know that the BBC went for Mr. Samharadze, a governing party MP, on this very point. Allegedly, the Georgian version is indiscriminate and goes for religious and humanitarian and charitable organizations, etc. Well, people can make of that what they do, and let's go on from there. And for the final one, which is that FARA requires registration statements. In other words, you can say to the US government, don't touch me with this law, I'm a bona fide journalist or academic. And Georgia doesn't, allegedly. Now, I don't have the time to go further into the depths of these laws, and I don't want to give legal analysis as if I were qualified to do so. But I do not find much reassurance in this much bandied about term that America really has a better law than Georgia, let alone the other Western countries and Turkey and Russia. Speaking of Russia, OCCRP, a well-known website for those who are interested in corruption in countries, is now reporting that Russia is going further than ever with its original law, the one which prompted the media and the Georgian opposition to call this Georgian law a Russia-style bill, as in the cartoon that you saw at the start of the segment, because Russia is now going to exclude what it regards as foreign agents from participating in elections. You might say high time, actually, but this is enough for people to lose their heads in the West and in the Russian opposition. Politico, which is based in both Brussels and Washington these days, is reporting, and I had an earlier iteration of this last week, that US senators, particularly, I think, some of the more liberally inclined ones, are now going to push for Congress to go beyond the White House in foreign policy and to make sure that the named politicians who are responsible for this act, as it now has become, could be sanctioned. And I mentioned last week, this is some of the expected fallout. The White House spokeswoman, who we often see making outrageous and ill-qualified statements, but not always, has said this time that Karine Jean-Pierre, that this is going to cause a fundamental reassessment of America's relationship with Georgia. That's not the American deep state talking. That's the more liberally minded politicians. We will see how this goes. Just a couple of images to indicate to you this is not representative of the whole protests. I tried to paint that picture last week from witnessing it fairly close up, deliberately not in amongst the protesters, but around the edges. But look at the youth of these people and the bandana wearing and the alternative face and hair. Obviously, people will go for photogenic shots, and they shouldn't take this as being all of those who are protesting. But there's a very strong teenage vibe, and it gets a bit more otherworldly than that, because here we have a young lady of perhaps 15 holding up a bilingual sign, English and Georgian, based on the Harry Potter lore or mythological universe. So expecto patronum, well, actually Latin, not English. I'm waiting for the remedy. And then in Georgian, dementorebo, so you dementors. So anyone she doesn't like in politics, or she's been induced not to like, is a dementor, one of the top categories of villain from Harry Potter. That wasn't a one-off. Here we have some gentlemen who look a bit older, enough to know better, and one young lady carrying 2 mugshots each, one of a Georgian government politician and alongside it a Harry Potter character. So it's getting a bit facile, juvenile, jejune, whatever you wish to call it. Just to end this segment, people, of course, don't speak Georgian. I think 99% of them who watch this news. So I will not put the video in. We don't have permission anyway. But there is an interesting rapper who goes by the name of Masteri, or the Master, who has got a huge number of views for a small country like Georgia for this rap from just before the protests began a couple of weeks ago, when the mood was hotting up. The rap is called Chemi Drosha Jer, which is idiomatically translated, I now reclaim the flag. And I'll just read my gist of what he was saying in that rap, because I think he represents the thinking part of the middle part of Georgian society that is neither very enamored of the governing Georgian Dream Party nor a fanatic of the EU. And it paints the scene for what's happening in many such countries on the eve of the real tensions beginning. So the rapper Master says, I posted the Georgian flag and the liberal pseudo-patriots called me a Russian stooge. Who can fail to see through them? It's my flag now. I don't give a stuff what footballers and pundits and fashion models yell about being a Russian stooge. I was brought up with basic decency in the 90s. I mentioned Christ and you made me out to be a Putin fanboy. Your democracy is double standards. Who is afraid of the cross, which of course is on the Georgian flag? There's a lot of anti-Christian sentiment among these young protesters. The rapper goes on, I tell you that the bankers are playing us. Play a dirty spook game, get called a loser. This lot, meaning the extreme agitators, cannot stand anything that's truly Georgian. Their facade is as fake as their sloganeering. We see you running around with all those NGOs on your CV. You can't make a single point without swearing. Music is all I have. I am asked to go to and live in Russia, and I'm being told that I'll be a social media whore. I'm a European, but I'm now reclaiming this flag. Obviously, that's one guy's attitude, but I think it shows that a lot of Georgian society is now thoroughly fed up of the extreme tensions that have been brought into Georgian society here.
Alex, thank you very much for that excellent report and insight into what's been happening on the ground. Amazing things happening all around the world. We need to be very careful in analysis. Politico was of interest to me, as our viewers and listeners will see when I get on to my own segment in the news. But before we get there, Mark, let's bring you on. And the topic is Carnegie, who we could say is one of those very influencing organisations that we're never too sure what they're doing or whose side they're on.
Correct, Brian. Good day, guys. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace is a constituent attendee of Bilderberg. That's the first footnote. And I'll also preface my remarks by mentioning that the foundation associated with Carnegie, of course, that's founded by the steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, who built libraries across the United States to kind of reassure Americans that he wasn't a total robber baron. At any rate, back around 1917 and before that, in the wake of the Federal Reserve Act, the tax-exempt foundation was created, and that gave the financial coterie, the financial consortium that runs much of the world, huge tax shelters. And with that, they would fund all sorts of think tanks and even art and culture pursuits, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So the Carnegie Endowment is a big player, along with the Rockefeller Foundation, in that kind of that segment, rather, of American history and the outcome of that. Anyway, looking at this first slide, the Carnegie Endowment is now going to tell us what disinformation is. And according to this report, they're going to counter disinformation effectively. It's actually called Countering Disinformation Effectively. And here's some of the key takeaways from countering disinformation effectively. I'm so glad the Carnegie Endowment is, batting for regular Americans here. And it's an evidence-based policy guide, they say, put together by two guys. And John Bateman and Dean Jackson, will look at them individually in a moment. Basically, without getting into all the details here, it says disinformation is widely seen as a pressing challenge for democracies worldwide, but it has proven difficult to define, understand, and measure, let alone address it. A new Carnegie report, however, runs to the rescue and offers evidence-based assessments of 10 major policy interventions, get that word, drawing on hundreds of academic papers and consultations with many leading scholars and practitioners. Each case study describes real-world uses, provides a resource list, and answers three fundamental questions: how much is known about the intervention, how effective does it seem, and how scalable is it? That was an important one to read. Now we'll move on from there. I won't get into all this. I'll just read the highlights. This is a summary of the overall findings. The actual report is 130 pages. I got this out of the summary. And it says, for one thing, there is no silver bullet or best policy option. It also says democracies should diversify their policy portfolios. Additionally, policymakers should set realistic expectations. Then, countering disinformation is not always apolitical. Moving on, pervasive research gaps will last for generations. And generative AI might not be a disinformation game changer, even though they say it has some potential to intervene, one of their tools to intervene. Moving on from there, this is a chart that's in there. It offers public information, government action, and platform action. And they're kind of trying to sort out the different aspects of this, Brian, and assess what might work and what might not. And the top one, no surprise here, and we've seen this before, is supporting local journalism. Here we go again. There's this idea that newspapers and other types of media outlets are drying up across Canada, across the United States. In this case, they're worried about America mainly. And if we could just get more local news coverage with the conventional worldview, all will be well. And so this is a recurring theme, not just with Carnegie. You're showing now, this next slide here is the second of the two categorization slides. This one, for example, gets into cybersecurity for elections and campaigns. Note number 7, statecraft, deterrence, and disruption. Interesting words. And note number 8, removing inauthentic asset networks. Let me repeat that one, removing inauthentic asset networks. And I read up on that one a little bit, Brian, and that mainly appears to concern outlets or sources on social media that misidentify themselves, that misrepresent themselves. But the wording of that suggests that it might go further. Anyway, we'll move on from there and comb through this. The next part is about the authors. John Bateman is a senior fellow in the Technology and International Affairs program at Carnegie, and Dean Jackson is principal of Public Circle Research and Consulting and a specialist in democracy, media, and technology. We'll learn a little bit more about them in the next slide. And Dean Jackson, we can pick this apart a little bit, is a principal of Public Circle Research and Consulting, as noted, and a specialist in democracy, media, and technology. In 2023, he was named an inaugural Tech Policy Press Reporting Fellow and an affiliate fellow with the Propaganda Research Lab here at the University of Texas at Austin. Previously, get this, he was an investigative analyst with a select committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. So that's a rather interesting note. He's been looking at Trump supporters and whatnot and viewing them as quasi-criminals. And going on from there, we'll get into the next one. And this is John Bateman, a little bit about him. He focuses on global technology challenges at the intersection of national security, economics, politics, and society. His research areas include techno-nationalism, an interesting concept, cyber operations, disinformation, and AI. He's an author of U.S.-China Technological Decoupling, a Strategy and Policy Framework, 2022, and former Google CEO Eric Schmidt, a longtime Bilderberger, in his foreword in that publication, called it a major achievement that stands out for its ambition, clarity, and rigor, and will remain a touchstone for years to come. So the authors of this Carnegie report have, an interesting CV to consider here. Winding this up, the interesting thing, though, Brian, is that for all the effort in this Countering Disinformation Effectively report, there's a lot of admissions, several, in fact, that show that while they're trying very hard to intervene and get what they consider disinformation countered and dealt with and perhaps even, removed, they're still admitting that it's a very tough hill to climb and that the job is by no means going to be easy, rather, and it's going to be an uphill battle to achieve and may take a long time. In this section from page 11 in Conceptual Challenges, it gets into that. This is a good example of what I'm talking about, that they admit that this is going to be quite difficult. Identifying disinformation presents several puzzles, it says. For one thing, labeling any claim as false requires invoking an authoritative truth. Yet the institutions and professions most capable of discerning the truth, such as science, journalism, and the courts, are sometimes wrong and often distrusted. Moreover, true facts can be selectively assembled to create an overall narrative that is arguably misleading, but not necessarily false in the objective sense. So what it boils down to, Brian, is they want to weed out polarization, extremism, and hate, and have this hunky-dory world from the viewpoint of the globalists, but they're admitting that it's a very difficult thing to achieve. Oh, and this last thing, and I'll just mention it in passing, the Carnegie Endowment and the Carnegie Foundation was part of a 1953 investigation by Congress of radical and subversive organizations, and they found that the Carnegie Endowment had been exploiting world wars and the concept of world wars to help exert political control. And that was found out or revealed by what was known as the Reese Committee right after the Korean War, right around 1953. And the left part of this slide is showing that the CIA did not declassify the final report of that committee, the Reese Committee. They didn't declassify it until the year 2001, I believe. So it was pretty sensitive material in its day, but the Carnegie Endowment was among several tax-exempt foundations, Brian, that, according to that committee, was engaging in subversive and unconstitutional activities.
Thank you very much, Mark. And of course, Carnegie would say they only exist to look after us all and do the best for mankind. So I think we're right to be suspicious. But you made a key point there that they're finding it difficult to counter disinformation and misinformation if the authorities are not necessarily putting out the truth themselves. So what better place to go than the BBC? And this caught my eye over the weekend. It's BBC Sounds, Ukrainecast. I'd never listened into this before, but I started to listen to this clip and I was struck by something. Let's just play it for you and we can discuss what they said.
BBC Sounds, music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, it's 793 days since Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In the last episode, we asked for your ideas of people we should invite onto Ukrainecast to answer your questions. And Jane, in North Yorkshire, here in England, got in touch.
Hello, Ukrainecast. In a recent episode, you asked listeners to suggest people for your podcast. I'm very impressed with General Ben Hodges, the former head of the US Army in Europe. Can you get him on? Thank you.
Jane, your wish is our command. Ben Hodges, welcome to Ukrainecast.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Tell us more about yourself.
Well, I was Commander U.S. Army Europe from 2014 through 2017, and then retired from the Army. I stayed in Europe after I retired, and now I serve as a senior mentor for NATO logistics. And I do everything I can to help explain why Europe and NATO and Ukraine are so important to the United States, as well as to the rest of us. So I'm interested in helping Ukraine defeat Russia and explaining how we can do that.
Well, perhaps it was just me, but I was fascinated at the idea that a lady called Jane in North Yorkshire would select former General Ben Hodges as somebody who the BBC should promote. Was it just a coincidence that this elderly lady's been focused on this man? Or could it possibly be that the BBC did a little bit of help to get the person they wanted? I'm not too sure, but let's look at Ben Hodges. I went to his Twitter page. Noticed that he said on that recording that he was there working for the United States, and then it was like he suddenly realised that he was in front of a British or a European audience, and he corrected it to say, "Well, I'm here for you all," but really he's not. He's here for the USA. And a very bland head on his Twitter page. But if you go down the tweets, you rapidly see what this man is. This was a pinned tweet: Ukraine making Crimea untenable for Russian forces, denying Russia the use of the decisive terrain of the war. This was a promotion of an earlier tweet where somebody was posting about the then recent attacks on Russian military sites in Crimea. And what did General Ben Hodges say? Well, he said this: "Well done indeed. Unfortunate that the US had to do this, but full credit to US CENTCOM and the US Army logisticians who have accomplished their mission." So to me, it was very clear that what's going on here is that the US is now fighting the Russians without too much cover. And Ben Hodges, the BBC spokesman, is going to push this to the British public, but he's coming in from a very biased position. Let's have a look at another of his tweets. It was this particular young lady. Sorry, let's bring this on screen for you. And it's Jessica Berlin. And she had some really extraordinary things to say. Look at the age of this woman and consider what she says. Let's have a look at the video clip.
Russia needs to lose and lose badly. Russia needs to crawl out of Ukraine on their knees, begging for mercy. That's what the Chinese need to see. That's what the Saudis need to see. That's what every dictator on the planet needs to see to ensure that they don't get any ideas themselves. Because if what they see is, oh, Russia is allowed to invade a democratic European country, literally on the borders of NATO, to butcher senselessly tens of thousands of people, to threaten global food security, to cause refugee crises, to cause the kind of destruction we haven't seen on this continent since World War II. If they're allowed to get away with this in the 2020s and then get back to business, well, then nothing's going to stop the Chinese from attacking Taiwan or from pressing forward in the South China Sea, etc. Because NATO will have shown that we cannot even keep the peace in our own front garden. And that is much more dangerous than internal political chaos in Russia. The implications of this war are truly global. This war, this conflict, shapes our century. And what we do or don't do will determine the rest of our geopolitical arrangement for the next generations.
Alex, if I may, just a very quick, your thoughts on that. I find this young lady, I find her scary. She is so naive and she is dabbling in very, very dangerous international politics. What's your thoughts?
I don't know her exact age, but I know that from the next slide you've queued up, she's under 40 because she's in the 40 under 40 list of bright young things. I found her eyes rather glazed over. In the fanatic sense, and that is not a good profile for somebody to be involved in this level of discussion of defence and security. But, and I will get some brickbats for this, but I'll say it, there's a particular move to get gutsy young women around the world, particularly the Western world, talking tough in these jobs, and the feeling is that this is balancing out the patriarchy of old. She hasn't got a clue.
Alex, thank you for that. Well, my key point, of course, is that this is a woman being promoted by General Ben Hodges that the BBC wants us to believe and follow. But you're absolutely right. If we have a look at her own Twitter page, there is the detail. But who is she really? Who is she working for? Well, you've got to look at the small print because she's a senior fellow of SEPA. And if we bring them on screen, here we are, the Centre for European Policy Analysis. It's non-profit, it's non-partisan, it's a public policy institution based in Washington, D.C., focused on, quote, strengthening the transatlantic alliance through cutting-edge research, analysis and programs. And then it's dealing with issues of democracy, security, defense to government officials and agencies. And it's helping transatlantic businesses navigate strategic landscapes. So this is all about America and promoting America's interests. But of course, this lady is put across as if she was just somebody who's got an interesting opinion that we should pay attention to. She's much more than that. And if we follow this organization through, here we've got leadership in action, 6 priorities for the transatlantic alliance in 2024. And if I just bring in the key ones on screen here, we've got secure Europe, contain Russia and constrain China. So it's pretty obvious that this is an organization in the best interests of America. But you should always look at the small print. I went to look at the International Leadership Council, and there, nestled amongst the very small, very faint names, I came up with this man, Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and also Matthew Kaminsky, editor-at-large, Politico. So when we're looking at stuff from Politico, we still need to know who they are really aligned with, and remember that this is a blatantly pro-American organization. If we have a look at the team, that's the next good place to go. I went straight to the board of directors. They sounded to be people who were powerful and in charge. And then if we bring names on screen, you don't really have to go very far. Larry Hirsch is the chairman. I called up his profile. Let's bring that one in if I can. And what you find is he's also the chairman of Highlander Partners LP, a private equity firm. And that sets the scene, because what you've got in this organization, which it says it's there for the best interests of mankind, of course, is a powerful mix of hedge funds, big business, politicians, and change agents, the very change agents that perhaps Georgia would want to restrict. And if I just take one more here, we've got A. Wes Mitchell. Why should we be interested in him? Well, just bring in a marker here. He served as Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs from 2017 to 2019, and he was responsible for diplomatic relations with the 50 countries of Europe and Eurasia, but he's also involved with NATO, the EU, and OSCE. This is a State Department man, so this is pure America. This is nothing to do with the benefit of nation states of the world. And if we go on through, it says that prior to joining the State Department, Mitchell co-founded and served as president and CEO of the Centre for European Policy Analysis. So I'll leave it there, but really this was just following through on who the BBC was promoting, as if they're just some innocent retired American general. No, you dig into it and you find that you're deep into prescribed American politics for the benefit of America worldwide. We'll leave that one there, but if you like what UK is doing, then please support us. And as we are saying, for a mere £5 a month, you are getting all of the UK column news, plus interviews, plus seminars, plus so much more. So if you're a subscriber already, thank you very much. If you can assist us boost our membership numbers, that would also be wonderful. Now, I'll just bring in information platforms, because we're always saying that the information we put out on other platforms is there to to share, which it is. Please give us a mention if you're pushing on UK column information. But today, I just wanted to highlight that Facebook is no longer available to us. We seem to have been locked out, and Facebook does not want to engage with us at allowing us back in. So I wonder whether we have been designated as an inauthentic asset network, as has been mentioned in the start of the news. Who knows? We'll see. And of course, if you want to support us by purchasing something from the UK column shop, that would be really excellent. There's a lot of good items there, and a purchase does make a big difference for us. It's a big boost, so do have a look. Now, Mike Robinson asked me to give a special mention for this interview, which is going out at 1 p.m. tomorrow. This young man, Micah Siegel, is 12 years old. He's decided he's had enough of school, and with help from adults, he is now embarking on a completely different type of education. And this is a really, really interesting interview entitled Too Cool for School. So have a look at that tomorrow and see the wisdom that this young man brings. Now, we've got this one here, Bring in the Noise. This is starting to promote the good work going on north of the border in Scotland in relation to vaccine damage and people who are vaccine injured, beg your pardon. So this is Sunday, June the 2nd. I've lost that one. Thank you. This is Sunday, June the 2nd, and it's 18 Jamaica Street. That's Glasgow, G1, 4QD, and it's a live Q&A plus a fundraiser. So that is doors open at 6 p.m. and the show starts at 7 p.m. And you can get tickets via Ticket Scotland. Alex, this is a good advert for us to have here because, of course, there's much good work going on in Scotland on this particular topic.
There is, and a lot of commentators, Brian, are now confessing, Neil Oliver is but one of them, quite honestly, that they didn't pay enough attention, whether they have a connection to Scotland or not, to the Edinburgh-based COVID inquiry. Some shockers are coming out of it. Scotland pursued perhaps the most rigorous COVID policies across the board of any United Kingdom nation, due not least to the Clintonite Devi Sridhar in charge of public health policy at the time. But that is now being redressed, and I have particular praise for occasional UK column author David Tate, T-A-I-T, who, as well as writing for us, and we will have more of his excellent pieces looking at regional COVID issues from freedom of information requests. David Tate also runs a Substack blog. Here it is, and sorry for leaning on the button too early when you were just talking about the previous piece. So David Tate's blog on Substack is called Biology Phenom. It'll be in the show notes for those who can't find it easily. And there are 2 parts now to his highlights reel. He's gone through previous iterations, and the first was a quarter of an hour. The second is an extended one to nearly half an hour. It's a bit obscure for people to go to Substack and find embedded videos because, of course, as you just mentioned, the big players, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, don't like us anymore. So in order to counteract that, he has provided direct download links, which will be in the show notes, so that you can, if you have the ability to send a file transfer or something of that nature, send the 2 versions, the quarter hour or the half hour, to anyone you want, so that they can put them on their own platforms or play them to whoever may need to see them. There are many shockers that will leave people scunnered, as they say, north of the border, about the policy that was being pursued during COVID. And David Tate, Biology Phenom, also here on ukcolumn.org, I think is the finest of anyone who's following this. Just also from me, praise on our recent piece. The popular Heather Haying, a big hitter on Twitter, who was also mentioned in the piece in question, has drawn particular attention and praise to Dr. Petra Busken's last essay, part 1 of 3, which went up in our comment section last week, on the spat that developed between the advocates of mass formation and those opposed to them, as explainers for, or as theories for why we all obeyed mostly during COVID. And Heather Haying is signposting people to the essay, which is here, The Paradigm Wars, Part 1. Part 2 should go up tomorrow, if I am able to fit that in with the other things I'm doing in Georgia, and keep with this series, because although the events in question and even the lawsuit between the protagonists are now behind us, this is now, I think, time for us to take stock and say, should we be spending so much energy on accusing other people in the dissident scene of having a traitor theory, or should we be looking at what was done to our minds?
We should certainly be looking at what was done to our minds, Alex. There's no question of this, because it affects how we see so much in the world. And there clearly is a massive campaign to attack our minds. Now, you've got more international news for us here.
This is a busy neighborhood, Brian. Georgia is itself very troubled. To the south is Armenia, which has been pummeled by Azerbaijan, which is to the east of Georgia and Armenia. To the south of that is Iran. It has now been confirmed this morning that the Iranian president, Ibrahim Raisi, and his foreign minister, Hossein Amir Abdullahian, were among those who were killed in this sorry scene. Not the sharpest of pictures, but that is what happened to President Raisi's helicopter as he was returning from the border between the Iranian province of East Azerbaijan and the nation of the Republic of Azerbaijan. It's confusing because that territory called Azerbaijan was split between the Tsarist-era Russians and the Persians, so there are places in Iran now called Azerbaijan. What was going on was that President Raisi and his party were attending the launch of a dam on the border between Iran and Azerbaijan, and on the way back, for inexplicable reasons, which may or may not have to do with the mist in those notoriously remote hills, the helicopter was downed or crashed. Extremely sensitive timing, because Azerbaijan is a close ally of Israel, and because Armenia, in retaliation, has formed strong ties with Iran, which is confusing to people because Armenia is the Christian nation, and you'd expect it to be against Iran, but that's the way things go in this region. That people have thought that perhaps there was some tampering with the helicopter, possibly by the Azeris from north of the border, from the Independent Republic of Azerbaijan, the Israel-allied nation, when Raisi was on the ground. Nobody knows at this juncture, but following so hot on the heels of the attempted assassination of Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, this is really something. This is Republic of Iran Broadcasting, with a reporter up in the misty hills at the scene. There was no sign of life there. They took hours to get up to the site and then took another 12 hours combing over it. Here is Reuters confirming this morning that Raisi has been killed. That's the scene of the crash, and you can see that the very thin nation of Armenia is just to the northwest. And what's either side of Armenia, so not highlighted, but the grayed out country, both to the west and to the east of Armenia there, so north and northwest of the helicopter crash scene, that is Azerbaijan, which is closely allied with Israel. I don't need to say more to our clued up audience as to the reasons why people may think that this was an Israeli retaliation, because they will be following Vanessa Beeley's contributions here and other people's contributions elsewhere. The Georgia-based blogger Money Circus thinks that something is off with this. I am not a helicopter communications or navigation expert by any stretch of the imagination, but he points out that there were 3 helicopters, and therefore the nature of the crash and its location was known, but it took time to reach it. He suggests it's possible communications were jammed, and he doesn't think that the idea of a hard landing is a sensible description of what happened, because you don't land if you fly into the side of a mountain. So it really went off the rails, bang, and in reality, as an Iranian official told Reuters, the president's helicopter was completely burned in the crash incident. So he calls it a manipulation of perceptions. Meanwhile, there is this also regarding just 1 month ago. John Helmer, Dances with Bears, is a very good primary source for a lot of Russian news. And he points out that just a month ago, there were very conflicting, contradictory readouts between Moscow and Tehran on a phone call, perhaps the last, between Putin and Raisi, on what to do with regards to Israel's aggression against Iran in the region. The long and the short of it is that the Iranians were possibly putting words into Putin's mouth that he wanted Israel punished more, or alternatively, the Russians didn't want it to be known in their communique just quite how much support there was for Iran in there. So we don't know what's going to come of that, but it's a possible explanation of what could have induced people to want to get him off the scene. Just this morning, and this is unconfirmed and from Twitter, so high caveats on this, but it's self-explanatory whose side this Twitter handle takes, Mossad Commentary. They were reporting this morning that there were unconfirmed reports of the assassination of the commander-in-chief of the Iranian police, who was shot 7 times, twice as many shots as were landed in Mr. Fico in Slovakia. So it's getting pretty hot indeed. Now, this tension in the region between Armenia and Azerbaijan, which involves Iran in it, is getting to some extraordinary geographical lengths. Here on the other side of the world, off the coast of Australia, in the French self-governing colony of New Caledonia, Nouvelle-Calédonie, there have been some serious riots recently because the French Parliament modified the constitution with regard to this overseas territory of France, so that not only the native Kanaks, the autochthonous people, could vote on who governs the island, but also French citizens or anyone else suitably qualified who lived there for 10 years. Lots of rioting, and you might think, what on earth has a South Sea island got to do with the Caucasus? You couldn't get more time zones apart than that. Well, there is an apparent connection. So first of all, we see that the French Interior Minister, Darmanin, has come out and suggested in terms that the Azerbaijanis decided to adopt the cause of the native Kanaks, the disgruntled natives. So that we see here in Le Figaro, that Darmanin is accusing Azerbaijan of interference in the riots and stoking them. And Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, calls this unfounded. But yet, look at this. Here is a photojournalist snapping what's going on down in New Caledonia. And you can see the second flagpole from the right is topped by the New Caledonian flag with the yellow circle containing the traditional arrow. But below that is the flag of Azerbaijan. Now, that could be somebody LARPing, as they see these days, but it could be something rather more serious than that. Finally, from me in this segment, Russia-related, but not Caucasus-related, in the Sahel, that region of West Africa between the Arab countries and the Black African coastal countries further down, in that zone that is so contested between America, Russia, China, and the European Union at the moment, as we've covered for many years, something remarkable has happened. First of all, to cover it is a Hong Kong law student reporting for Jurist News, obviously, shall we say, a Western mindset site for law students who believe in the rules-based international order, for short. And Chiwai Hu here is reporting that the countries in question, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, which have all had problems, huge problems with Islamists doing horrible things in their country, and who haven't been able to get much help from their former colonial overlord, France, have decided to leave the equivalent of NATO in the region, ECOWAS, well, sort of an equivalent of the EU or NATO, which was always dominated by France and Nigeria, and have formed a new alliance instead. This took some people by surprise, although it was pretty well trailed by those who should have been following it. And the Hindu here, reporting from India, it's good to get other perspectives, this will all be in the show notes, report that this they're calling it an alliance. They're less keen to call it what it actually is, which is a confederation. This is the last step before you become a single country. Huge news, also given that many countries in that part of West Africa had a currency tied to the French franc for a long time. They are forming a new alliance called the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES. So they're actually a new bloc there, and they're undertaking, as part of this agreement, that the alliance, or I should say confederation, that they're forming, that there will be no French or American military assistance. That will be banned, and instead there'll be Russian military guarantees. A great coup for Russia, however you look at it, and I'm left wondering why France allowed this to happen if it was within its power to stop it, because this leaves France without its uranium mining.
Alex, thank you very much for that comprehensive report. There's a lot of thought necessary when we look at what's happening in these areas and whether parties are working together behind the scenes or not. We'll wait to see. Let's bring in a quote and see what you make of it. So we'll pop this up on screen. Here's the quote: "No one is safe anywhere until everyone is safe everywhere." Well, what an astonishing statement. There's a bit more to it. The world needs agreement on the pandemic accord. And who came out with this I'm going to call it utter nonsense, well, the first sentence, but it's our very own Gordon Brown, ex-Prime Minister of UK. So what we need is a video, isn't it? Let's have a look at the video.
COVID claimed 7 million lives and infected 700 million people. And last year, the International Monetary Fund estimated that the costs of the pandemic could go beyond $12.5 trillion. An influenza pandemic could well be worse, particularly as it could strike at the young just as well as the old. And this would deepen the human and the economic impacts. Member states of the World Health Organization are currently negotiating a pandemic treaty and revisions to the international health regulations. Success at this will come if countries are able to agree a wide-ranging and strong deal that creates incentives to cooperate between countries and companies. So the agreements between countries have to come first. We already have an idea of what might be useful. The current strategy to donate influenza vaccines in real time could be extended to all pandemic vaccines and to diagnostics and to medicines such as antivirals. A binding treaty would make it harder, but not impossible, for countries to halt the export of vaccines and medicines during pandemics. Vaccine nationalism is unfortunately impossible to eliminate, but with an international deal and regional production hubs, the dynamics of vaccine supply during a pandemic would improve dramatically. Some outbreaks can be halted, others can be delayed. We don't know when the next outbreak will start. It may even have done so already, so the world urgently needs to have a plan. The potential costs of preparing are tiny in comparison to the scale of these pandemics, and this is the right way of thinking about it. Now the economists get it, so maybe it's time for the politicians to get on board. The world does not know how big or how dangerous the next pandemic is going to be, nor what pathogen will cause it, nor do we know when it will happen, but there is going to be one. So we must act, and we must act together, now.
Well, I could tell from our chat box that people were really enamoured with that appalling video by Gordon Brown, trying to lure us into a false sense of security. But what a statement. We don't know how big or dangerous it is. We don't know the pathogen. We don't know when, but we can tell you it's coming. I would say there's some weaknesses in that particular scientific argument. But if we go back to his Twitter page where this was posted, this is what it looked like. I'm just going to say the good news is if you have a look at the comments that came up underneath it, they were brilliant. The man that sold all the UK gold reserves enabled the mass immigration that's ruined UK. If I ever needed a sign that the WHO Treaty is a bad thing for the UK, it's this statement by Gordon Brown. This one saying bought and paid for. Gordon Brown calls Labour supporter a bigoted woman. The Guardian report some time ago. This one here, Gordon Brown, the man who sold most of the UK's gold at a poor price, drove the economy to the brink and beyond, supported endless wars, and essentially a Blairite. Here we've got no one is safe anywhere until everyone is safe everywhere. How trite, how manipulative, how very wrong. We just popped this last one on. Not a chance the people have woken up. Who is a racket controlled by vested interests, and you are but a bag carrier for them. Gordon, you are better than this. Well, I disagree with the final statement. He clearly isn't better than that. But what UK Column picked up from the video is that Gordon Brown was working alongside this man, Regan Sahel, who is a strategic communications consultant at the World Health Organization. And what are his specialist areas? Data-driven strategies to develop effective social media communication campaigns, identifying and combating misinformation and disinformation. That ties in nicely with Mark Anderson's earlier segment. But Gordon Brown fully in bed with this whole pandemic scam. And just a thank you to Lucy, who forwarded this one, pointing out that Dr. Vanessa Kerry has been appointed as the WHO Director General Special Envoy for Climate Change and Health. She can do both, Wonder Woman. And of course, this is John Kerry's daughter. So I'll leave that segment there and leave you to think about that. And I think this brings you back on, Alex, with some more local news.
Yes, Brian, I've been taking people to faraway climes for most of this news. So let's bring it right back to the West Country, but the other side of the peninsula from where you're sitting. Thanks to our own Kenny, we know that Bude in North Cornwall has not one, but 2 juries to sit in judgment over their peers. But these are not juries of a Crown Court, much less of a district court. No, they are a youth mini jury and an area community jury. Now, this is sortition, alias aleatory democracy, because 18 minors aged under 16 and under, were chosen at random. That's what sortition or aleatory democracy means, to sit on a jury, cheapening the word by twisting its definition, to share their own lived expertise, according to journalist James Davies here. They were also briefed by 7 so-called experts, and rather laughably, expert was put in inverted commas by Mr. Davies by mistake, so that he's almost, giving the game away that these people are, just one side of the argument. Professor Mark Baldwin, Professor of Climate Science at Exeter University, and Skye Neville, campaigner with Kids Against Plastic Tat, were 2 of those 7 experts who told the teenagers it's awful, we should be doing more for the climate, etc. So that is reported by the Bude and Stratton Post. If you don't know what all the fuss is about, just type in democracy into ukcolumn.org's search function, the magnifying glass or the search bar, and you will see that we've gone into this in a lot of detail of the many kinds of appalling false versions of democracy. I think this aleatory one is the worst because it involves people being told by hand-picked briefers for one side what they should be thinking, a bit like a courtroom which is briefed only by one side. It wouldn't fly in a court of law, but apparently it's good enough to rule over us. A viewer has sent this. The link will be in the show notes as well. UK 100, an organisation which propagandizes and has signed up almost all of our local councils now, is sending this survey out. Time's running out to have your say on the future. Apparently climate change, as in the interests of all these well-paid organisations, must be put at the heart of the devolution agenda. In other words, we must be getting the councillors and the council staff's head in every part of the United Kingdom full of climate emergency before more money and power is somewhat unlawfully, in many cases, devolved from His Majesty's government in Westminster to various regions of England, as well as Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Now, follow this link through if you would like to from the show notes, because, look, it's all panic questions. What do you think is the problem? Why aren't we doing enough about this climate emergency? But look, there is a facility called Other at the bottom of each of these questions where you can give them in polite and factual and reasoned terms what for their nonsense, if you so desire, and you don't have to put your name in either. So do that before the deadline, which is quite soon. North Yorkshire, we've mentioned already in the news, has something even worse. Open North Yorkshire. Thank you to a long-term viewer whom we've quoted here before, who tells us that he found out by chance that his local council there were running a scheme called Open North Yorkshire, which they described as behavioural change about climate change and net zero nonsense. So he took it upon himself to ask them, with a Freedom of Information request, which we'll see in a moment, what else they were doing in regard to behavioural change. And you will recall, Brian, that we have covered similar from the West Midlands before. One of the local councils there had an FOI served on them by a local resident in this particular regard. So there are several, perhaps most of our municipal bodies by this stage, who have behavioural change units. And if you're a regular viewer who knows about this, why aren't you asking and trawling for what your own council has on this and sending it in to us, because it is quite telling. So here is a document, which will be in the show notes too, which was produced by North Yorkshire in the first year of coronavirus hubbub towards the end of 2020, the final report on using behavioural science to support communication campaigns. It's more milquetoast than some of the things we've seen, certainly nothing compared with the Spy B equivalent at national government level. But the graphics tell us a thing or two. I don't know, Brian, whether you would be interested in having healthy thinking patterns courtesy of your local authority, but that is something that North Yorkshire Council can help with. And perhaps you're not altruistic enough, but you would be if your local council in Devon appealed to your sense of altruism. Well, if you live in the North York Dales or Moors, you can benefit already from this beauty. But the problem is, and this will be in the show notes too, the FOI in question by the viewer asked the council to provide to him all details of behavioural change programmes as per the points which I won't read. And they omitted to send him the document which I have just shown you. They did not put that into their FOI response. Perhaps a bona fide omission or something else, who knows. This is likely to be repeated in your own case. So, go ahead and find out what's happening in your own area. And in the west of Wales, we find the same, well, not the same, but in a similar area of concern, which is grooming, sex education going into the content of the curriculum. Wales, as we've covered, does not have opt-outs so that children can be pulled out by their parents from unsuitable materials. The Western Telegraph reports, and look, it's the local democracy reporter, a BBC-funded person, Bruce Sinclair in this case, who's reporting this, that parents have now been saying to the council, we have concerns about our children being grooming. There's plenty more to go on there, but wherever you are in the United Kingdom, you should be, of course, following this up actively with your council.
Alex, thank you very much. Troubled times, and a lot of people in the chat box talking about the sheer chaos and mayhem that's clearly being orchestrated in UK. That to me fits very well with the idea we have a satanic agenda. Over to you, Mark.
Well, anyway, at this point in time, do you want me to do the full report, given the time?
Given the time, if you just cut it down a little bit, and we'll certainly discuss this more in UK Column Extra after the news.
I just wanted to frame that out. I'll give a very basic report, and we'll do some commentary on the way modern governments, particularly globalist governments, view art as another avenue of culture that can be so easily degraded through statist regimes. Anyway, to give it the basic reporting, this is out of Charisma, a Christian publication, saying that up front. And we're talking about, of course, mainly about the so-called official portrait released about King Charles, showing him, that is, the portrait of him. And this article, the headline is Satanic Claims Arise Over King Charles' Portrait. With the recent unveiling of the first official portrait of King Charles III, much of the world recoiled in horror at the blood-red sight of it. Commissioned by British artist Jonathan Yeo, the monarch is surrounded by red except for his hands and face, which retain their flesh tones, I would say barely. Yeo said it is the red of the Welsh Guards uniform that inspired such a polarizing portrait. And he was quoted as saying, the vivid color of the glazes in the background echo the uniform's bright red tunic, not only resonating with the royal heritage found in many historical portraits, but also injecting a dynamic contemporary jolt into the genre with its uniformly powerful hue, providing a modern contrast to more traditional depictions, Yeo's website states. And here we have just a kind of a random view of interpretation, you might say, of this official portrait to the left, which came out of Twitter from a location in England. And they claim that if you take a mirror image of the portrait and put the two sides together, what meets in the middle looks something like a goat's head or some sort of demonic figure. That may be a subjective interpretation. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong, but this is what's out there in cyberland. And of course, to the right here in this slide, you saw King Charles' face and that kind of ruddy, sort of pockmarked look it has, even though that's supposed to be the most realistic and genuine part of the overall so-called work of art. Moving on from there, we have Tim Yeo, a picture from him in 2014, and to the right is Jonathan Yeo, the artist himself. I won't go into a lot of detail here in the interest of time, but the artist is politically connected somewhat. Tim Yeo was a rather significant member of parliament, also scandal-ridden in some respects. And he worked with Tony Blair, among others, and served in the shadow cabinet as John Major's Minister of the Environment, and so on and so forth. I may not have all those associations exactly correct. And a lot of the news you see out there, Brian, about the king's portrait don't talk about Mr. Yo's other work. Here we have from Wikipedia some information and an image of Jonathan Yo's portrait of Tony Blair. And people can read the show notes about the particular details of that. But it gives you a better idea of what this artist is about. Is he really a painter, or is he more of an illustrator? And this you don't often hear about too. In this slide, Jonathan Yo also did a so-called masterpiece of George W. Bush, and this was said to have been done from porn clippings from pornographic magazines put together to form George W. Bush's face. And U.S. Republicans, it says here from the Register publication, are none too pleased with British artist Jonathan Yo, who's just completed a fetching portrait of George Bush constructed from Grumble mag clippings, it says, but many sources say from porn clips. Not that George W. Bush deserves a lot of praise or anything. He's often seen as the architect of terrible military policies against Iraq that really gave America even more of a black eye. But here, at least, we see a little bit more about the artist and some of the other work he's done. We'll move on from there and wind up for today.
Okay.
And yeah, we can just
go ahead, talk about it. Just on this last one, Mark.
Yeah, because there's more to talk about with the Rockefeller Foundation and the Museum of Modern Art. And I would invite viewers seeing the main show now to stay tuned for extra. We'll talk about the Rockefellers in art and the deep state in art and cultural values, things like that. But this last one is something else we're not seeing much of. All the hype is about King Charles' portrait shown to the right here. We see Jonathan Yo's portrait of David Cameron, and you see the same ruddy face, kind of a stained look, nothing edifying, nothing uplifting at all. And it's just a snapshot of modernism's view of art, which is more degradation than it is uplifting. But we'll talk about those kind of things much more in extra. Much to say here, and I'm sure that you guys want to comment too.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much for that. Well, I think it's an appalling picture, but of course, in The Green King, Debbie Evans and myself been exposing what this man's been up to, and I think it fits him quite nicely. We must end there, so I'm going to say, Mark, thank you very much for joining us today, and you will be with us for extra time. Alex, thank you very much for your comprehensive segments today, and we look forward to talking to you more in extra time as well. We must leave it there. Big thank you to the audience wherever you are in the world, and a huge thank you for those generous people that support UK Column with a monthly subscription. We can only do what we do with your financial support. So thank you very much. We must end there. Bye-bye.